Picture Tom Scholz, a quiet, intense man, half engineer, half musician, crouched in a small basement surrounded by a jumble of wires, amps, and custom-built recording equipment.
And as I became more adept at using them, I was able to create all the out-of-this-world sounds that people are used to hearing on Boston albums, but haven't heard before, most likely.
Scholz wasn't your typical rock star. He was a self-proclaimed gearhead with an MIT degree, a perfectionist who spent his days working at Polaroid as an engineer and his nights in his basement trying to make rock history. Scholz's vision was a big one. He wanted an album that sounded like a full band, roaring across an arena, a sound as vast and energetic as the legends he'd grown up listening to.
And then I got interested in playing guitar when I heard I think probably Jimmy Page and Led Zeppelin and Jeff Beck were my biggest inspiration to pick up a guitar and try to learn how to play some of that stuff, which wasn't very easy, I found out.
Yet here he was, making all of this happen alone, in a basement no larger than a glorified storage room, wielding nothing but his musical imagination and technical expertise. Scholz had always been a tinkerer. His background in engineering wasn't just a side gig, it was an obsession that bled into every part of his music-making process. As he worked on the album, he began to build equipment that simply didn't exist at the time, using his technical skills to craft sounds no one had yet achieved from a home setup. Amplifiers, effects boxes, recording devices. Scholz had a hand in creating it all, tweaking everything to perfection so he could capture the vision in his head. It was an unusual process in the 1970s, a time when home recording was synonymous with lo-fi, almost apologetically unpolished music. Most musicians who recorded solo at home focused on intimate, minimalist tracks that leaned into the limitations of the space. But Scholz was wired differently. He wasn't just looking to create music. He wanted an experience, something that would put listeners in the front row of a concert without ever leaving their living room.
He told me repeatedly, no future in music, stay away from it. After Boston became a huge hit, I started a company building devices for musicians, novel, new devices. And I remember him on the phone with me saying, "What are you doing wasting your time on this engineering stuff? You should be making a new record."
During his Polaroid days, Scholz's co-workers probably saw him as a bit of an oddball. He wasn't an ideal employee, by his own admission, frequently showing up late or sneaking out early to get back to his music.
There were days when I didn't make it into Polaroid on time, most days actually. I was a horrible employee.
Scholz knew his heart wasn't in his day job, but he needed the steady paycheck to fund his nighttime obsession. His basement became a sanctuary, a place where he could obsess over every note, every riff, until he had shaped a sound that was all his own. What's remarkable is how invisible his work was. No bandmates, no producers, no one watching over his shoulder. Scholz was creating an album that would eventually become a worldwide hit, and he did it without any hype, without the assistance of a studio, and without so much as a whisper to his peers. Just him, a handful of guitars, and an assortment of homemade gadgets hidden away beneath his suburban home.
And I would just keep experimenting with the equipment until I managed to stumble onto the sound.
When he finally finished recording his demos, he faced another hurdle, getting noticed in an industry that didn't look twice at solo efforts. Scholz's tapes eventually found their way to CBS Records, and the executives who listened to them were floored. This wasn't just good, it was incredible, with a depth and a driving energy that made it sound like a full band performing live. When they realized it was the work of a single man recording in a basement, they were baffled. How could one person capture such a monumental sound? Surely, they thought, this had to be re-recorded in a proper studio with a full band. For CBS, Scholz's methods seemed too unorthodox, too risky for a major release. A band in a studio could be polished, shaped, controlled, predictable. But Scholz was undeterred. To him, recreating his sound in a traditional studio was a compromise he wasn't willing to make. After some wrangling, CBS gave Schultz the green light to record the album his way in that same basement that had become his second home. He finally enlisted a vocalist, Brad Delp, whose powerful voice was the perfect complement to the rich, layered sound Schultz had built. Delp's vocals added a new dimension to the recordings, giving Schultz's soaring guitar lines a vibrant counterpart, one that matched the raw energy of his compositions. When they finished, what they had was Boston's self-titled debut album, a record that would soon ignite the charts and capture the imagination of millions.
The only song that wasn't recorded in that studio is the very last song of the first of the Boston's first album, which is "Let Me Take You Home Tonight," which Brad wrote. So that particular song was actually recorded in the LA studio with all the members that you see on the album. So, and I remember, at least for me, when I was young, I always remember hearing that song and I'm going like, something, it doesn't sound, it sounded sonically different than the rest of the album, and you could actually hear it. If you place that particular song against the rest of the album, there's a little, it's just a slight disconnect. There's a little bit more, it's a little bit of a brighter sound as opposed to some of the other tracks, as opposed to the rest of the tracks on the Boston album.
Released in 1976, Boston was unlike anything else at the time. Tracks like More Than a Feeling and Foreplay Long Time weren't just songs, they were sonic experiences, engineered to transport listeners to the front row of an imaginary stadium concert. Schultz's meticulous layering of guitar parts and carefully crafted solos made each track feel immense, pulsing with a kind of live wire energy that was almost unheard of in recorded music. It was a sound that would inspire an entire genre of stadium rock, a movement that sought to make every listener feel like a part of something huge and unforgettable. The success of Boston was explosive. It became one of the best-selling debut albums of all time, selling millions of copies and cementing the band as rock legends almost overnight. Schultz's basement experiment had become a cultural phenomenon. His approach to recording, stubborn, independent, and technical, set a new standard for what could be achieved outside the boundaries of a professional studio. It wasn't just that he had broken the rules, it was that he had rewritten them. Suddenly, the idea of a home studio didn't seem so absurd. Musicians began to see the potential in controlling every part of the recording process, in crafting their own sound without industry interference. Yet even with the album's success, Schultz's relationship with the music industry remained strained. He wasn't interested in fame or fortune, he was chasing perfection. Schultz was a musician on his own terms, an artist who valued control over popularity, and his career reflects that tension. He continued to release music with Boston, but each subsequent album would see him pushing further against the demands of labels and producers, determined to protect the integrity of his sound. In a way, Schultz never stopped being that quiet guy in the basement, tweaking and refining, forever obsessed with achieving something greater. Today, Boston stands as a testament to Schultz's pioneering spirit. It's a record that decades later still feels alive, still holds that elusive sense of immediacy and scale that so many artists strive for. And in every ringing guitar riff, every crescendo, you can hear the echoes of that cramped basement studio, the hum of homemade equipment, the vision of one man who dared to think bigger. Schultz may have started out alone, hidden away from the world, but the sound he crafted there still resonates, a testament to rock music's power to defy boundaries, to transcend the limitations of place and time. It's a reminder that sometimes the biggest dreams start in the smallest rooms,